The Republican governor and Democratic lawmakers want more spending. Will Republicans in charge of the legislature agree?
We think there's a lot to work with in terms of the governor's budget. She has a little higher revenue projections than what we do for the next year. I think that the differences, I won't say can be easily bridged, but they can be bridged.
Is there also a bridge to Medicaid expansion? The healthcare industry and Democrats are ready.
I went to the Arizona Medical Association, and it's the first time I ever saw a room full of doctors on board. And not only on board with something, but they are actively lobbying us to pass it.
Lawmakers prepare to build the state budget, and we preview it tonight on Arizona Week.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
Little seems different at the Arizona legislature this year. Republicans want to keep the lid on spending. Democrats want to restore some of the big cuts from the last few years. And Governor Jan Brewer wants more health care and education funding. Where there is a difference is that it's not plainly predictable how we'll end up. We'll detail it for you, starting with a look at the big picture of the budget. All of the dynamic of business growth, job growth, educational growth, or improvement, maybe we should say it that way, come to play when you have to make decisions about the state budget.
Right. And these are all intertwined now. See, we put more money in the university system last year, as well as K-3 education, as well as into our business tax structure, as well into our most seriously ill, and especially now into our CPS program. We've already gone into session and passed additional funding for CPS. So trying to make sure we're protecting those who are the most vulnerable, but at the same time bringing all these pieces together so that they all get to grow together at the same pace.
There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, legislative staff, talking to governor's staff, that kind of thing, and then and finding out where everybody is. The governor, as she has to do according to the Constitution, has put her budget forward. We think there's a lot to work with in terms of the governor's budget. She has a little higher revenue projections than what we do for the next year. So we're looking at evaluating where the governor's office came up with her projections versus where we came up with ours, see if there's some common ground. But I think that the differences, I won't say can be easily bridged, but they can be bridged.
The shift in numbers as a result of last fall's election gives the Democrats larger minorities in both houses. Will that give the Democrats more voice in the budget making, do you think?
Well, that's hard to tell. The process isn't a particularly open process right now. So, and my observation is that even compared to past years, there's still most of that's done in a back room, not in a public forum. So if I were in charge, I'd do things a bit differently. But I do know that the pressure and the demand isn't just coming from us. The things that we want to do are also being requested by the business community, and a very, very strong voice is being heard about the need to improve education in the state. So I think we'll have more influence because the community agrees with our position.
And do you think Democrats will have a seat at the budget table this year?
You know, I think so. I really do. I think we have a common sense budget. I think that, like I said, we've been aligned as much as we can with Governor Brewer. I think she's put forth a lot of common sense aspects to our budget, and we want to make sure that, again, we're working together to make sure that that happens. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have our values reflected in our budget as Democrats, but more than that, we're trying to work as much as we can with the governor and with some of the Republicans on the other side to make sure that we're doing common sense things this year. We understand that it's just really important to have to work together, really, and I think that we're more aligned than a lot of people would like to believe. So I really do believe that the tone has changed a little bit, but we're still working.
Budget cuts have opened holes in the state's safety net for the poor, and now Governor Brewer is stepping out of her comfort zone to propose a solution: expand Medicaid using the Affordable Care Act, and it won't cost state taxpayers a dime. We asked legislators if her idea will fly. Do you think that the Medicaid expansion will pass? First of all, your stand on it
I am for it.
and its chances of passage?
I believe it will. I believe the Speaker of the House is currently getting the caucus, his caucus, on board with it, and in our caucus, the Democratic caucus, we are on board for the Medicaid expansion. I mean, it's just a lot of the meetings that I've had around the state. I mean, I went to the Arizona Medical Association, and it's the first time I ever saw a room full of doctors on board, and not only on board with something, but they are actively lobbying us to pass it. And it's just good policy, because many of our rural hospitals are hurting because of uncompensated care, and in addition, some of the lower income areas, which is one of the areas that I represent, they are also experiencing budget shortfalls because of the uncompensated care that currently is happening. And I believe that Medicaid expansion will go a very long way into turning that around and making this state profitable.
What we have is a great speech on opening day. We talked about, if we can just get these dollars to draw down federal dollars, boy, do the math, isn't this right? And on a piece of paper and a calculator, most folks would be, yeah, that's probably true. But here are the concerns. First off, the big concern is that we all know, you know, I know, everybody knows, eventually you run out of money to borrow when somebody stops buying your debt. $16 trillion plus back in Washington, that frightens people. And the reason it especially frightens folks like me, because I've been here and I've watched the federal government already do this. So last year in the budget, they cut out TANF, which I think we've actually talked about in the past, as the temporary assist to needy families. These are the poorest of the poor. There's over $40 million that the federal government already cut from the state. We put that back with your taxpayer dollars and mine, state tax dollars. And by the way, it's ongoing. We will continue to fund that. So there goes the fear. Exactly what my members are talking about. Well, what they do is they put this little piece of bait in a fish bowl and hope to get a fish, and then they get the fish, but then all of a sudden they don't throw any more food in for the rest of them. And we're worried that they'll start cutting. They just did it come January 1st with Medicare. Medicare doctors across the board were getting cut on their reimbursement rates. So we have no faith in the federal government. But that doesn't mean that we can't look for options and ways to get in here, because we have uncompensated care issues, especially as it relates to the rural communities. I think there's a pathway we can take, but it's not going to be this simple path that CMS, the feds are going to be able to say, you either do it this way or not. I mean, I don't think the public would be opposed to House, Senate oversight. I can't give all that money, both state and federal dollars, to you to say, okay, this is how this whole process is going to work, or to somebody who runs it. There has to be some oversight. I think that's not unrealistic for folks to expect.
Do you see the Medicaid expansion that the governor has proposed passing the legislature in some form?
I don't know at this point. I really don't know. I haven't taken a pulse of my seatmates in the legislature. We're certainly getting a lot of input. I am taking a very steady approach. I don't know what's going to happen ultimately. I think obviously there's a problem. During the fiscal crisis, we had to freeze the childless adult population and access. And we simply had to do it because we didn't have the money. And the federal government allowed us to do that. Now, under Obamacare, we have the choice on if we're going to expand it or not and add back those childless adults. Now, on the one hand, we have members that are just philosophically opposed to it because they're afraid that the federal government, since they're in so much debt right now, in the future, they're not going to be able to afford to pay this, and the state's going to be stuck with the bill. But then on the other hand, we have a practical problem in that currently people have to they need health care, they're sick. And so if they don't have any health care coverage, they're going into the emergency rooms, and the hospitals are saying they have to eat the cost. So it's a problem we have to resolve. It's not going to be an easy problem. I really believe that will be one of the biggest issues this year.
I think Medicaid expansion is it's a no-brainer. we're paying into the federal tax system for a reason, and we should have that money back. I mean, as much as you may disagree with what's happening on the federal level, it is going to happen. It is in place, and we need to, as Arizonans, take advantage of that. And not only that, but I think that rural areas in particular are going to suffer with hospital closings and other things that are going to negatively affect the citizens of that area. So we need to make sure that we are providing a quality of health care and that we're doing that with the Medicaid expansion.
And do you think the Medicaid expansion will pass the legislature?
We're working on it. We're working on it. I really do believe that people on both sides of the aisle will find the value of it and pass it, ultimately.
There's some, in my opinion, some legitimate concerns with that, but there's also some strong reasons to do that in terms of what's best for the citizens of the state of Arizona. I think my projection is that at the end of the day it will pass, but it's like a 60-40 projection on that, but I think it does stand a chance, yeah.
And that projection probably moves from one day to the next.
Yes, it probably does, yeah.
And then what does that mean? Is there a tie from the Medicaid expansion to funding in other areas, for example, education?
Not really, because when we're looking at the Medicaid expansion, the proposal that the governor has that is funded via a self-imposed tax from the hospital community. So that should not have an effect on what we might or might not have available for education in other areas.
If you make it the Prop 108, meaning you need 2/3 because it would be a tax increase, right, do you think the votes are there for that?
Well,
if all these other things fall into
well,
place?
and that's the key place. You know, but I can assure you, right now we don't really have a bill to vote on. We have a concept. And right now, I don't have the votes in the House to move it out with 31. And you pretty much know I've got 24 Democrats on it. Because folks wonder, well, what does that mean in my community? How does that work here? You know, they understand the crisis. They understand where they want the dollars to go. The question is, who gets to manage that? And when the feds decide to say it's all over, do I have to now cut those budgets and be the bad guy? Is that how this is going to get? Remember, we've gone through that only a few years ago. And nobody really wants to go back to where we were.
Nearly half the state budget funds education, so schools took big spending cuts in the last few years, exceeding $1 billion. With the state showing a surplus now, there are calls for restoration that even some Republicans are part of. Incentives are funding to support job growth and rollout of education reform. In that next budget that you're starting to assemble right now, what are going to be the growth areas?
The members are very serious about expansion of the K-12 system. You've heard a lot about Common Core. I think there's an awful lot of support for members move. Maybe not as quickly as the governor would like to move, because we are nervous about making sure we have enough dollars to get through the next couple of years, but certainly make a strong enough commitment to the K-12 system that they know that there's real support for that. In the university system, they can, if they're going to move forward and help accelerate our students through their schools to save them money and get that workforce out here, I want to help them. So you're going to see more money and funding going into our university systems. University of Arizona Medical School campus right downtown. You'll see us continue that commitment.
House Democrats have put forward their own budget proposal. Just last week you did that. What do you see as the priorities for the budget for the coming fiscal year?
Oh, no question about it. We need to restore funding to education. We've done some very deep cuts to education, and it's well documented. And it's not even across the state. Some school districts are still doing fine. Others are suffering with cuts, and we're putting more responsibility on them with the Common Core standards and the need to train teachers to teach this new standard. Very concerned that we're not giving schools the resources to do that job and do it well. If you pay attention to what's going on around the country, Republican governors around the country are all touting the fact they're putting more money into their budgets for education. And we're going to lose ground if we don't get serious and do, the Democratic budget is one step. I think the governor's budget is another. I don't know whether the legislative budget even has the increased revenue in it for education, but it's got to be priority one.
First of all, let's start with education. What do you see happening there?
Well, education, the biggest thing there is the Common Core standards. I think those are going to go through. Just if you look at the makeup of the people that are pushing them, you have universities, you have educational professionals, you have business professionals, the chambers. They're going through. However, it's very important to look at, are we funding it appropriately? And I've heard a number of people, particularly teachers in the classroom, that are very concerned that this is underfunded. I want to delve into that issue, particularly as the Vice Chair of Higher Education, and say, what are we doing to our teachers in the classroom? Are we giving them the supports they need in terms of resources and training? I think Common Core is a great concept, but if it's not well funded, it's going to fail.
I actually have a bill that probably won't be heard this year, sadly, that would suspend the non-job related corporate tax cuts that have been enacted the last few years but haven't gotten into place yet, until we hit one of three targets. One of which is that at least 93% of our third graders should read at third grade level. At least 94% of our 12th graders graduate from high school. And at least, and we're at least the national median for per pupil funding for K-12 education. One of those things, we meet those, then we can go ahead and give more tax cuts. Until then, we've got to refocus that our economic development strategy has got to be about preparing our kids to compete in the global economy. And we're not doing that right now. And if we don't do it now, we're going to be hurting 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the line. That's absolutely vital for our long-term sustainability.
As with the Democrats, when we released our budget last week, it does provide additional funding to train teachers to meet the Common Core standards, and I'm totally for that. Many of the vast majority of school districts in where I represent, they attempted to have budget overrides in order to pay for the increased man hours and hours that the teachers would need in order to comply with the Common Core standards, and those budget overrides failed, unfortunately, -1, which is in Tolleson. And I believe that our focus on ensuring that our children are set up for the future, which actually was passed in Prop 301, but we've kind of a little bit ignored that. But I believe that this current legislature will fund that, and they will. Just because we have a budget surplus this time, the focus will be on not only simplifying our tax code to bring more jobs here and to better facilitate businesses doing business in Arizona, but to ensure that our children who are currently being educated graduate, have a college degree, and they're able to take those jobs that we're also currently trying to provide for as well.
Well, I think education has been cut a lot in the last year, or last several years rather, and we need to make sure that with the new Common Core standards and PARC, that our teachers are prepared to make sure that our students are achieving what they need to move on to the next level.
I think there is plenty of money to invest in our education system to make it the best in the country if we choose to do so. I don't think we're choosing to do so, and I think that's a terrible mistake.
Is there kind of a paradox in the idea that everyone is pushing educational reform, the Common Core standards, et cetera, which cost money to implement, and yet the education budget, at least in the current conversation, is not going to grow to the need of that?
Well, I've often said that you can't reform and cut at the same time. We saw that a lot of Republicans have talked about what's happened in Florida, where there was a lot of reforms there that dramatically increased student achievement. Those cost a lot more money to implement than it cost before those reforms went into place. We need to be willing to invest in our kids' future and, by extension, our own economic future. And I don't see us doing that at the rate we need to. And that's going to become a very, very serious issue, if it isn't already, in the next couple of years, as business starts pushing for that more than they've been pushing for tax cuts.
Really, for me, it's about the economy, ultimately. I think that's why I concentrate so highly on education. But it's workforce development, as was seen in our Democratic budget. We make sure that we have vocational tech programs, adult education, that we're tying some of the economic concerns and the job creation to the fact that we need to have people who are prepared to take those jobs.
Now, for an assessment of how the budget will be shaped and the all-around political implications, I'm joined by veteran legislative reporters Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic and Luigi Del Puerto of the Arizona Capital Times. Welcome to you both.
Hi, Michael.
Mary Jo, you told me earlier in the week that not much is going on right now as far as budget discussions are concerned on the legislative level. What are you hearing?
Well, what's been happening is the appropriations committees in both the House and Senate have been conducting a series of hearings where they bring in the major state agencies and let the agencies make their case about what their needs are. The advocates show up and make their pitch, and that's about wrapped up. So that's what's been happening publicly. Behind the scenes, there's been a lot of talk between staff for the governor's office and the legislature on how to proceed on the budget. I don't have any particulars on that at this moment.
Luigi, in those appropriations committee hearings with state agencies, does it look like anybody's getting any special favors? Are things going to be a little different this year, perhaps because there's a little more money?
Those hearings are mostly informational hearings. So what's going on is you would have an agency head basically present what an agency is doing, what their budget needs are. But beyond that one, there's not much that's going on so far as pushing for certain spending requirements or pushing for certain programs. Certainly in those informational hearings, you would have agency heads basically laying down what their priorities are. But like Mary Jo said, what's going on right now really is very preliminary in the sense that it's actually the staffers that are mostly talking about how to go about crafting a budget proposal. And I think the goal is to come up with, at least on the legislature side, come up with a budget proposal that's both agreed upon by the Senate leadership and House leadership.
And Mary Jo, in regard to that, will the Democrats have any say this year? They have bigger numbers, but still well in the minority in both chambers.
I don't think you'll see the Democrats being invited to the negotiating table. However, down the road, if things get tight, if things are looking difficult to get a budget through, there might be some outreach to Democrats. We just saw a maneuver in the Senate this week where a couple of the Republicans who are viewed, for lack of a better term, are viewed as centrists, sort of made a point that if they abandon the majority Republicans on a couple of key bills, it can make all the difference in the world. We've seen that on a foster care licensure bill, and then on the death of a anti-union bill yesterday. So that might give an indication that if you go over and side with the Democrats, you might be able to make a few more things happen. But aside from that kind of scenario where things are very dire, I don't see the Democrats being invited to the negotiating table. I mean, heck, rank and file Republicans aren't invited to the negotiating table.
How do you see that, Luigi? Same point of view about that?
Yeah, Mary Jo's right. I don't see the Democrats as a caucus negotiating the budget with the Republicans. What I do want to say is that doesn't mean that their input can't be folded into the budget. They might have certain ideas that some Republicans will find agreeable to. The best way for the Democrats to get their inputs in the budget proposal is actually to approach a Republican who might be their friend, or who might be an ally on an issue, for example, and basically have that Republican sponsor a particular idea when it comes time that the rank and file members, everybody on the Republican side, is invited to actually have an input on the budget.
And Mary Jo, on the budget, one last question about it. Everybody seems to be focusing on education, and of course it makes up about half the state general fund budget. Even Speaker Tobin in the House is saying that there needs to be more money spent on education, especially the reforms package. What are you hearing in that regard? Is that going to happen?
Oh, I think there definitely will be more money for education. Whether it will be enough to fully fund what the schools need to meet these new Common Core standards is another issue. Layered on top of that is, if you remember, there was a court ruling back in January from the Supreme Court that said, from the State Court of Appeals, that said you've got to fund inflation in the schools. That is something that the legislature has not done for the last 3 years. That's about an $82 million investment every year. One indication that the legislature is very hinky about this is that their attempt to request an appeal was due last week, I believe, and they've sought an extension to take this case, to take their appeal up. They're still trying to work on, how they're going to craft their bid to say, look, we think this ruling's flawed and inflation funding does not have to be included. So that's a big $82 million question that nobody's addressing in their budget plans.
And Luigi, on that inflation measure for schools, if it's upheld in the courts, assuming that the Republicans do appeal it, will that come off the top of what education might otherwise get?
Well, what's going to happen is they will be required to fund that budget, and that means potentially crowding out certain things that, for example, the governor is asking for. That might mean more resistance from the state legislation, or certainly conservative folks like Andy Biggs basically saying, look, we already have to spend $82 million this year, another $82 million the next year, and an even slightly bigger amount the year after, and that means we really don't have much room to spend, and therefore that may mean some of the funding priorities of the governor, or even some Republicans, not making it in the budget.
Mary Jo, let's talk about Medicaid for a minute. No bill yet introduced to put forth the governor's proposal to expand Medicaid to 133% of the federal poverty rate under the Affordable Care Act. What are you hearing about what might happen with that?
It's widely believed that the whole Medicaid question will be rolled into the budget as part of the budget discussion, which is why there wasn't a bill. Just 2 weeks ago, the governor got a bill out for her other major initiative, which is to streamline the sales tax, and she made sure that got into bill form before the deadline hit. Medicaid's a different issue, and it will be a vital part of the budget discussions. And I should add that I was talking to Senate President Andy Biggs this week, and he says he's still hopeful that they can get a budget done by mid to late March. Whether that comes true, we don't know, but those dates, mid-March, is about when they hit that 65-day limit, which is their sort of somewhat increasingly informal deadline for getting a budget done.
Just a few seconds left, Luigi. Your take very quickly on whether they'll get a budget done in March, by the end of March?
That's a really tough question. It depends on governor's strategy ultimately would be on Medicaid. If something's set in place and they know exactly how to go about getting that proposal through in the state legislature, then yeah, we might say budget in March. If not, then we might see some maneuvers, and those maneuvers could mean a budget proposal by May, maybe even June.
Luigi Del Puerto of the Arizona Capital Times, Mary Jo Pitzel of the Arizona Republic. Thanks so much for being with me today.
You bet.
Thank you.
That's our program for Friday, February 22nd, 2013. Thanks for watching. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.